guys, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. Today's tutorial is such a fun one. This is a bag that when I first saw the pattern, I thought, that's cute. And then, oh, I don't know about that. I'm gonna try it. And then I made it. And if you've been following me on Instagram, you know there was a lot of back and forth on how I felt about this pattern as I was making it. But then the end result is so good. So today's tutorial is for the Dillan Lunch Bag by I Think So. Holy guacamole, this bag is so good. So first, here's the exterior. You see we have this beautiful pocket that just juts out the front. I really love that it pops out. It's not a saggy pocket. It's very firm. I really love this pocket. Then we have this cute little handle on top. We do have D-rings on the side, so you can make this a little shoulder bag or a crossbody bag, which I just love. Let me see if I can show it on. So you can see it's a good size. It's a little bit bigger. It's not a small lunch bag. I think this could be too big for some kids, but this is a great lunch bag for adults. I'm going to show you the front pocket. It's just this single pocket on the front. It's got lining on the back, which we're adding to the pattern today. We actually top stitched this pocket onto the exterior of the bag. So this fabric right here is just the exterior fabric. We're going to go over that. I know it's totally different than anything I've done before, but it turns out really good. So I'm using double zipper pulls today. So when you open it up all the way around, pop it open, nice and big, very, very stable. I'm totally changing up the interface on this bag because of what I have, honestly. But this is such a firm, foamy bag, and I don't know if you can see, but we have to bind those seams. This is not a bag that we turn and birth. This is a bag that we assemble as it will be finished, and then we just bind the seams, which is very controversial, apparently. I talked about this on Instagram a little bit, and there was some pushback about this seam binding challenge, but I'm going to show you how I do it today, and you're going to let me know what you think, and when you give it a try, report back. So when I was showing this bag on Instagram, I had a few of you offer up some different suggestions on what it could be used for. Obviously, this is a great lunch bag. It's very firm. It's very foamy. We do have some insulation in the interfacing. A couple of you mentioned this could be a great travel beauty bag, especially for those of us who have to travel with a lot of products. I think you're 100% right. You can put all of your travel size shampoos, conditioners, body washes, put your makeup, put all your stuff in this nice big bag. Another suggestion that I saw thrown out that I absolutely love is this would be a great bag for new moms. This would be great to store breast pump materials, tools, all of that stuff. It's a great travel bag. You can put a little snack bag inside of it. It's all wipe downable. This is a beautiful, beautiful design that can be used in so many different ways. So thank you so much to I Think So for allowing me to film this tutorial today. I cannot tell you how excited I am to show you how to make this bag. And I am even more excited to see what you do with the pattern because, oh, there's so many things. There's so many ways you can go. So before we get started, let me remind you that all the timestamps for this tutorial are down in the comment section. It's at the very top of the comments. It's from me. There's just numbers there. Just click on the number of where you need to go and it'll take you straight there in the video. I will warn you, I don't think this is a beginner pattern. And that breaks my heart because you know how much I love sharing beginner patterns with you guys. Now, that's not saying a beginner can't do this. You are more than welcome to try this as a beginner. It is a beautiful finish, but we have some serious curves here. You can do it with the help of the right tools. You'll be fine. We do have some curves. We are doing a newer technique with the binding. And honestly, these newer techniques are more difficult for those of us who have more experience sewing a different way than it is for beginners. So a beginner might actually really love this binding technique because they don't have a lot of experience doing it any other way. But for those of us who just really love birthing those bags, this is a little bit more challenging. If you're planning on using this for a bag that could have any sort of liquids on the inside, I would use some sort of waterproof material for the lining, something like pull fabric or waterproof canvas. On this version, this is all waterproof canvas on the inside, including the binding. Everything is waterproof canvas. This makes it very easy for me to put whatever I need to in there and wipe it down quickly. This version of the lunch bag was made with cotton lycra on the exterior and waterproof canvas on the lining. That does create some bigger, bulkier seams. So it was more challenging to put together than this version, which is cotton canvas on the exterior and then quilt cotton on the lining. So just keep that in mind when you're picking your materials. The thicker and the beefier the material, the more challenging it's going to be, especially around those curves. But it's completely doable. If I can do this with these materials on my domestic machine, you can too. So like I said, I will have a few modifications to the pattern today. I will make sure I note those on the screen while you're watching. Any measurement modifications I have will also be down in the description of this video. If you're not already a subscriber to the channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Anything you want to say, any comments, questions, shout outs, anything at all, leave them down in the comment section. I read those every single day. I absolutely love seeing your guys' take, your opinion, your ideas on all of these patterns, on all of these tutorials. All right, let's get started. So for the pattern today, you're going to need a ½ yard of exterior fabric. I'm going to be using these 2 different quilt cottons. And for the lining, you'll need 1 yard of fabric. I'm going to be using waterproof canvas today. I'm also going to be using the waterproof canvas for the strap, the D-ring holders, the handle on the bag, and the binding for the seams in the very end. I will be using waterproof canvas for almost everything today. So I definitely like to have a full yard of this OtterTex waterproof canvas on hand for this bag. For interfacing the quilt cotton, you're going to want to use some SF101. Now the pattern doesn't have you interfacing the lining pieces with SF101. That's totally personal preference. Since I'm using waterproof canvas today, I will not be interfacing my lining pieces, but I will be interfacing all of the exterior quilt cotton pieces with SF101. To prevent bulk in the seams, the pattern actually has separate pattern pieces for your woven interfacing, which we'll discuss in the next step. In addition to the SF101, I'm also going to be using a small scrap of Pellon Peltex. Now this is going to be just for the base of the bag. So you can see the base of the bag is a small rounded rectangle. I'm just adding this to the bottom to provide a little bit of extra stability to the bag. This is completely optional and it's not in the pattern, but I did find when I would put in a heavier item like a camera in the bag, the bottom would droop a little bit. This will help prevent that. The other big adjustment I'm making is with regards to the insulation. Now the pattern suggests using reflective insulation aluminum foil foam. I don't have any of that. I couldn't find it in any local stores. So instead what I'm doing is using some sew-in foam from By Annie Soft and Stable and some Insole Bright. Now the Insole Bright has foil inside of it. All I'm doing is taking the pattern pieces for the insulation, cutting them out of the foam and the Insole Bright, and then I just base those pieces together to create a nice thick unit. I find that adds a lot of structure to the bag and I really like the results using this combination. The pattern calls for 2 number 5 zippers, one at 23 inches long and another at 12 inches long. I'll be using zipper tape today, so I will cut that as I go. For the front pocket, I have 1 zipper pull, and then for the top pocket, I'm going to use 2 zipper pulls so I can have that nice double zip open. For the crossbody strap, I have 2 1-inch swivel hooks, 2 1-inch D-rings, and 1 1-inch slider. Now the pattern suggests you use cotton webbing, which is thicker for the strap and the handles. If you're using that, just make sure you use hardware that goes with the size. So the pattern suggests using 1 1/4 inch webbing, which means all of your hardware would be 1 1/4 inches. I actually don't have 1 1/4 inch hardware, which is why I decided to just make my own strap for this tutorial. As always, I'm going to have my sticky stuff to help me out. I have my Beacon 3-in-1 glue. I have this leather 1/4 inch double-sided tape. I have my Dritz wash away 1/4 inch tape. The thread I'll be using today is this Gutermann thread. I will also be using a Universal 8012 needle, and I'll be sewing on the Juki TL2010Q. A few items I've found extremely useful when making this bag are my clover clips, some pins, a good stiletto. Now this is going to really help you at the sewing machine with those curves. If you don't have a stiletto, there's a lot of them out there. A good stiletto will help you here. I also have a second seam ripper. Now this is just an inexpensive seam ripper. I will be using this to actually make marks on my pattern pieces. So I'm using this seam ripper on paper, which again is why it's inexpensive. Also, a couple of great marking tools will help you out today. I have this white chalk pencil marking tool and this air erasing sew line marker. Next, let's talk binding. There's a lot of different things you can use to bind the seams of your bag. One of the most common options is fabric binding. You can buy this at the store. You can also make it yourself. I have made a ton of different fabric bindings, as you can see here. When you're making your fabric binding, you just want to make sure you're paying attention to the seam allowance. The seam allowance in today's pattern is a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, so you're going to want to make binding that will cover that well. If you have one of these bias tape makers, I find that the blue bias tape maker actually makes a good size binding for a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. There are lots of tutorials out there on how to make your own bias binding. I will have a link for one down in the description of this video. Another fun option is this folded elastic. Now I got this from By Annie, and this elastic is nice and stretchy, and it has this midpoint line on it that makes it easy to just fold naturally on it and wrap it around your seams. I did find this to be the easiest item to work with when binding the seams. In today's video, I'm actually going to be using these strips of waterproof canvas. Now, with waterproof canvas, you don't have to worry about the edges fraying or anything like that, so we actually don't need to do a double fold. So I just cut these strips at 1 inch wide, and each one is about 40 inches long. This allows me to just fold it over the seam and sew it in place. Since I'm using waterproof canvas as my lining, I didn't want to use any sort of quilt cotton as the binding, just to keep it all cohesive. Also, if you use the same fabric for your binding as you do for your lining, it will be almost completely unnoticeable. So now let's talk about the pattern pieces. In the pattern, she actually has 2 sets of the same pattern pieces. This took me a minute to figure out, but she has a label for A4 paper. Now A4 paper has different printing standards, so only if you're using A4 paper will you use the pattern pieces that follow the large A4 on the pattern. So before that are a few pages with your pattern pieces. Now when you print these off, make sure you print them off at 100% in Adobe Acrobat Reader. Another tip, she gives you measurements along the top of the long rectangle, letting you know what length that should end up. For this pattern, we're going to tape the edges of the paper together. In a lot of patterns, we actually overlap the edges of our paper when we're piecing together our larger pattern pieces. In this one, there is no overlap. The very edges of the paper come right up to each other, and then you tape it. The next piece of advice I have for you is to print out at least 2 copies of each pattern piece. This is because you're going to have different sizes. You can see in this large pattern piece, we have the fabric size, which is what we cut it out as. On the dash line, that's actually going to be your woven interfacing size. And then on this solid line that you can see I cut already, that is your insulation size. So if you really wanted to make this easy, you could print off 3 versions of these templates and then cut out patterns for each version. What I did was I printed out one of the full pattern piece. I then printed out a second one and I cut along that dash line so that this is just for my woven interfacing. On either one of these pieces, you can then take your inexpensive seam ripper and then just slice little dashes along that interior solid line to help you mark the pattern on your installation. This is how I mark the pattern piece on my foam. So the lower piece is the piece of fabric that wraps around most of the bag. You're going to need a cut of your lining for that. You're going to need a cut of exterior with the SF101 centered on the back, already applied. And then if you're following me, you're gonna want that interior insulation cut of your foam interfacing, and I have that basted on to my Insulbrite. I have the same setup for the back piece. This is just the very back of the lunch bag. I have a lining piece. I have my exterior fabric with the SF101 applied and centered. And then I have that smaller cut of my foam basted on to my Insulbrite, just like this. For the rounded rectangle top and bottom, I have 2 cuts of lining, 2 cuts of exterior fabric, both of these with the SF101, and then 2 of my foam and insulation sandwiches. But on the bottom one, I have the Insulbrite basted to the foam, and then I also have that basted to that piece of Peltex. The Peltex was just cut at the same size as the foam. The rest of the pattern pieces don't require any sort of insulation attached to them. We have the front pocket zipper panel. You're going to have a lining and an exterior. The exterior, if quilt cotton, should have that SF101 attached to the middle of it. We're going to have the front pocket gusset. Again, we have the exterior with the SF101 and our lining piece. Then we have the upper piece. This is a much longer piece. We have that exterior fabric with the SF101 and our lining. And then this is your front pocket. This is a really fun piece to play with if you have a print of fabric that you really want to highlight. I love these hitchhiking ghosts from the Haunted Mansion, so I decided to make that the focal point of my bag. This is quilt cotton and it is interfaced with SF101, and then I also have a lining piece. The last items I wanted to share with you were my adjustments to the strap. For the handle, I have a piece of fabric that is cut at 12.5 inches by 5 inches. I will be double folding this to create the strap on the top of the bag. For the D-ring connectors, I have 2 pieces of my fabric cut at 2 inches by 2 inches. For the strap of the bag, which is the crossbody strap, I have a cut of my waterproof canvas. And then like we already mentioned, for the binding, I have 3 cuts of waterproof canvas cut at 1 inch by 40 inches each. So now let's prep the top and the bottom of our bag. Grab your top and bottom exterior pieces. Decide which one of these you want to be the top. I'm gonna have this fun one on the top. So now take your top exterior unit, your lining top unit, and the foam insulation combo you have that's going to go on the top of the bag. So for me, this does not have the Peltex. What I want to do is I want to lay it so that I have the insulation side down against the wrong side of my lining and centered. To hold this in place for now, I'm actually just going to add some of this Beacon 3-in-1 glue to the insulation side, and I'm going to glue it to the back of the lining. So once again, just make sure you center this as best you can. Once you have this foam in place, lay the exterior unit wrong side down on top of it. So we should have the right side of the exterior face up. If we flip this whole unit over, we'd have the right side of the lining face up. The foam side of our interfacing should be against the wrong side of our exterior, just like this. Now grab some clips and just clip around this entire unit, matching up all of the raw edges. Now let's go to the sewing machine and baste these 2 units together at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have the top attached, you can put that to the side. Let's go ahead and prep the bottom. Now you're more than welcome to glue down your bottom unit just like we did with the top unit, but you don't have to do that yet. It's a little bit easier to work with these curves if we don't have this in place just yet. You'll see why we did that to the top in the next step. So for the bottom, we're gonna do the same thing except without the insulation. We're just going to lay our exterior and our lining units down wrong sides together, matching up all the edges, and then pin around the entire unit. Now let's go to the sewing machine and just give a nice big long basting stitch all the way around this unit at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, we can go ahead and put these to the side while we prep the handle that will go on the top unit. If you're using your cotton webbing, you're gonna grab your 12.5 inch long cotton webbing here. If you're using waterproof canvas like I am, we have to prep this first. So I have my waterproof canvas and I'm going to lay it wrong side up. I'm going to grab a ruler and I'm just gonna mark the midpoint line. So that's gonna be 2.5 inches into the center along the long edge. Then I'll take the parallel raw long edges and fold those up wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line. I'm then just going to use some clips to clip this in place. You can also press this with an iron, but I do find the clips give me a little bit more control. Do the same on the other side. Once you have both of your edges clipped, just fold the whole unit together, hiding that midpoint seam in the middle, and then just add each edge to each other's clips. All right, now we can take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch along each folded edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we have our handle all prepped and ready to go. This is where I like to use that leather double-sided tape. You could also use glue or any other sort of sticky material. I really like this leather tape because it sticks to this stuff like no other, but it can be very challenging to sew over. We're not gonna sew over it much, but just be careful of that. So grab your top panel. Now this will be the one that has that interfacing already inside of it. And then grab your pattern piece for the top panel for the fabric. Now, there is a box here. I already cut mine out. You're gonna wanna do the same. Line up the edge of your pattern piece along one of the edges of your top panel. Grab any sort of marking tool and mark that box. You can see it's a very faint mark on mine because I'm using such dark fabric. Flip the pattern piece over and do the same thing on the other side. We're just trying to mark placement for our straps right now. You just need a general idea of where it needs to go. So now grab your strap, and if you have a side that you prefer to be exposed, we're gonna call that your right side. So for me, I have darker stitching on one side, lighter stitching on the other. I'm gonna say the darker stitching is my right side. Lay your strap right side down. I like to use the grid marks on my cutting mat for this. And I'm just gonna measure over 1.5 inches from one end and fold the strap wrong sides together. I'm then going to grab a couple clips and just clip that in place. I'm gonna rotate my strap and do the same thing on the other side, just folding in 1.5 inches from the edge, wrong sides together, and then clipping in place. Now I'm gonna attach each end one at a time. So I'm gonna cut off a very small, maybe 1-inch piece of my super sticky tape. And I'm going to just place that centered on the folded edge of our strap that we just made. Take off the paper. And I'm gonna fold this down with the folded edge down, so wrong side down, and center it on that white box that I drew using the pattern piece. And then just stick it in place. You can also use pins here, glue, whatever you feel comfortable using. We just don't want this to move. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to run over the top stitches on the end. And then after I do the top stitching on one side, I'm going to sew down, holding in the bottom edge, and then sew over the other top stitching, and then back up to the top, making a rectangle. Then I'm gonna sew an X over it, just to really hold this handle in place. Now we have one end of our handle stitched in place, and you might start realizing why we added the foam. The pattern doesn't have you add this foam until the end of the bag making process. However, with the handle stitched to the lining in the exterior, you can't actually get your foam piece into this panel without trimming it and then inserting it. I just found this to be easier. So now we're going to add the other side in the exact same manner. I have a small piece of double-sided tape, and then I'm just going to tape this down right over that chalked rectangle. And you should notice your handle standing up just like this. It should not be flat. You obviously want to have a nice handle to grip this with. Now just kind of eyeball it, make sure it looks centered enough to you. All right, and now we're gonna go sew this on at the sewing machine in the exact same manner that we sewed the opposite end. Your handle should now be attached. You can go ahead and put this to the side for a minute. Next, we're going to make our D-ring straps. We're going to prep these the same way we prepped the handle. We're going to mark our midpoint line, so that will be 1 inch along one of the edges, and then fold the parallel edges up to meet that mark, wrong sides together. You can add a couple clips to hold it in place. But this time we're not folding it a second time, we're just going to leave it like this. Do the same thing with the other connector. And now we're just going to take both of these to the sewing machine and top stitch along both folded edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now grab your 2 D-rings and slide the connector over the flat part of the D-ring with the wrong side, so that will have those raw edges on the back, covering that straight edge, and then fold them wrong sides together around it. Do the same for the other D-ring. And now just to keep this together, let's go to the sewing machine and sew along these two clipped edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now take your D-rings and your top panel, and you can see that there are markings on the side of our top panel on where we put these connectors. But to be honest, it's just going to be centered along your strap. So if your D-ring connectors are the same width as your strap, it should just run right along. Like if you were to continue that strap, these would just be the continuation of it. Since mine are a little bit smaller, I'm just going to center them along my strap, just like this. Now we're going to go back to the sewing machine and let's just baste down the edges of these D-ring connectors at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, you can take your top and bottom pieces and put them to the side for now. So now we're going to begin working on the front pocket. Grab the exterior front pocket zipper panel and then grab your front pocket zipper. Now I'm using zipper tape. I'm actually just going to trim down my zipper tape so that it's a little bit longer on each end than my panel. Don't forget to add your zipper pull to your tape if you haven't already done so. It's never a bad idea to go to your sewing machine and sew along the edges of your zipper just to make sure your zipper doesn't fall off the tape at any point. So now take your zipper and with the zipper pull on the left when closed, lay it right side down along that exterior front pocket zipper panel. And now we'll just clip along this top edge. So now let's take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew along this clipped edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're using your zipper foot here. So once you have your zipper attached to your exterior panel, if you have overhang like I do, let's go ahead and trim that down from our zipper, just so everything is the same size. The size is okay. Now grab your lining panel and we're going to lay our lining panel right side down against the back of our zipper tape, and then we'll just clip it along that previously sewn edge. So now we can go back to the sewing machine and sew along this clipped edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance once again. Once you have the exterior and the lining in place, we're going to just press them away from the zipper. I know it's kind of hard with waterproof canvas to get it to press well. And what I like to do before top stitching is line up the raw edges, wrong sides together, and just make sure that they're the same spot, just so I have one nice clean unit. And then I just pin those raw edges together. Okay, now we can take this to the sewing machine and top stitch right next to the zipper at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have it top stitched, grab your front pocket gusset and lay that right sides down over your zipper and zipper panel combo. You should notice that width-wise, they end up the same size. Go ahead and clip along those short edges on both ends of your unit. Now we can take this to the sewing machine and sew along both of these clipped edges at 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have the exterior gusset attached, flip your unit over so you have the wrong side of the zipper facing up. Grab your lining gusset panel and lay that right side down over the wrong side of your zipper, and also attach these to the short edges. Now let's take this back to the sewing machine and once again sew at 3/8 inch seam allowance along the clipped edges. So after you have the lining attached, flip the entire unit so that the lining gusset and the exterior gussets are wrong sides together. And then what I like to do is just clip along the edge of the gusset panels to line them up. So once you have both end of the raw edges clipped together, remember we clipped the exterior and the lining wrong sides together, we're going to go to the sewing machine and just baste along these clipped edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you haven't already, you can also baste along the zipper panel edges. It's just nice to keep all of these loose edges together and tight. It'll make the next step much easier. now we're going to attach the gusset to the front panel. This is your first round of curves, and these are pretty tight curves. So I would say that attaching this pocket is the most challenging step. So that before we attach anything, we want to mark a bunch of midpoints. So let's start with our front pocket. I'm just going to fold it right sides together, short edges together to find the top midpoint marks. And I just grab some scissors and I make the tiniest little triangle snip at the very top. And you can see when I open it, that leaves this nice big triangle here. I should probably make a smaller one than that. That was a little big. But we want to make super small cuts so that they'll stay in the seam allowance and won't affect our pocket in any way. All right, that one's better. Now I'm going to do the same thing to find the midpoint marks along the edge. You could also mark this with a marker or pin it with a pin, whatever you feel comfortable doing to find these marks. All right, now our front pocket has been marked. We can set that to the side. We're going to repeat this process with our gusset. Now for the gusset, we already have midpoint marks marked along the edges by our zipper. So I just find those seams and line them up, wrong sides together, or lining sides together, and then pull along the edge to find the midpoint between those seams. And then again, tiniest cut. Do the same on the other side. I'm gonna find the midpoint marks on both sides of the gusset. All right, now I'm gonna go find the midpoint marks on the zipper side, and then also on the zipper tape, because we'll need these marks in a future step. Okay, so now I have all my marks made. I'm going to take my gusset and I'm going to lay it right side down against my pocket panel. I'm going to line up the midpoint mark on the zipper, so not on the zipper panel, but on the zipper tape. I'm going to line up that midpoint mark with the midpoint mark on the very top of my pocket panel and then pin together. I'm now going to do the bottom. So again, I'm going to be folding it so that the exterior gusset panel is right side down, and I'm going to place it against the right side of that pocket panel on the bottom and clip. Now do the same thing on the sides. This time my midpoint mark is actually just the seam between the gusset panel and the zipper. So all I have to do is match up that seam with that side midpoint mark and clip in place. And then do the exact same thing on the other side. So once you have your 4 points marked, then we're going to go ahead and clip along these curves. Now I like to clip with the wrong side of the pocket up, and I create like a little bowl shape. I just kind of push the panel in and clip it to that zipper tape, and then do this around the entire unit. You want to use a lot of clips here. The more clips, the easier it's going to be to sew this. And if you find puckering, just unclip a few clips in the area, mush the fabric around a little bit. It's a technical term. And then you should find that you should be able to straighten it out pretty well. I found when I was using cotton lycra, this was a much more challenging step because the cotton lycra and the SF101 became very thick and it did not want to adjust for me. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew along the clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you find that you're really struggling with these corners, have some scissors nearby, clip the corners as you're sewing. I find especially if you clip the zipper tape, that will help loosen up the corners a little bit and allow you to get there with your needle. I like to sew this with the wrong side of the pocket panel up. So I will have it at my machine just like this. Okay, this next step is not in the pattern. The pattern just has you do a zigzag stitch and overlock this edge, and then the interior of the pocket is left like this. I like a bit of a cleaner look. but that means it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So this step is optional, but grab your remaining lining pocket panel, and we're going to lie this down right side down along the right side of the exterior panel, but with this gusset tucked in the middle. So it's a little bulky, just do your best. You might find this easiest if once again you mark those midpoints along the top and the sides of your lining panel, just like we did on the exterior panel. And then we can just line this up, again, right side down along the back of the zipper, lining up those midpoint marks. And just make sure you tuck that gusset and zipper panel in the middle. I know it's a tight squeeze, but this gives the pocket a really nice finished look on the inside. And then you can go around and just clip this lining panel to the exterior and zipper panels. And this should be a little bit easier since you already have the exterior attached. If you find that this is pulling a lot, I did find that if I clip little notches on the corners of the zipper tape, it spreads out a little bit easier when attaching my lining panel. Whenever you're clipping this in place, do your best to make sure you don't pinch the exterior fabric and, you know, end up overlapping it right here. We don't want to mess up the stitches on the exterior fabric when we attach our lining. So now on the back of the exterior panel, I'm going to mark a 3-inch opening on the bottom of the pocket in the center. And this I will leave open for turning in just a moment. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and starting at one of my marks, I'm going to backstitch, and I'm just going to trace over the stitches that I already have on the back of my exterior panel, making sure that my lining is getting caught under the needle all the way around, and then stop at my other mark and make sure I backstitch well there. All right, once you have the lining attached, just turn it over and make sure all of the edges are included in there. If you find that some of your lining kind of slipped, that's okay. Just trim down those corners a little bit, just to make sure we don't have any lumps anywhere. All right, now through that opening, turn your pocket so that it's right side out. So I just give it a really good finger press around the zipper, and then around the bottom as well. Okay, for the opening, what we can do is just fold down that lining piece that's open. And I just fold it down, wrong sides together, so that it's covering these stitches on the gusset. So I just kind of fold it and tug it. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew along this folded edge through the lining panel and then also onto the top of my gusset at about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just to close this up. And then I'm going to top stitch along the pocket panel right next to the zipper. You can top stitch around the entire unit if you'd like. I'm only going to top stitch right next to the zipper just to make sure my lining doesn't get in the way of my zipper when I'm using my pocket. So here is our pocket all ready to go. You can see that it is a bit of extra work adding that step, but it does give it a nice finished look on the inside of the pocket. Now we're going to move on to the step that probably confused me the most, but we can do it. It actually ends up really cute. So now grab your exterior lower piece and the template to the exterior lower piece. Remember how I suggested using an inexpensive seam ripper to rip along those lines for your insulation? Do the same thing on this zipper panel gusset marking in the middle of your pattern piece. We're going to draw this shape onto our fabric now. So this is going to be a little bit challenging because of my fabric. But what I want to do is I'm going to sketch inside those lines, and I'm gonna mark where my midpoint is. And you may see me interchange between the marker and the chalk pencil, but I'm gonna mark inside these lines that I cut with my seam ripper so that I can trace where my pocket is going to be attached. Make sure you mark these midpoints right here because that's gonna be the big item that we attach. So I'm gonna go all the way around, marking inside these midpoints. Let me see how that looks. I can kind of see where I am. So the big parts you want to make sure you mark are the midpoints for the top and the bottom, and then the midpoints on the side. Okay, once you have this sketched out on your fabric, and I just chose the wrong fabric today, almost any other color this would be much easier on. Flip your pattern piece wrong side down, and let's do the same thing on the opposite end. Again, what we're most concerned about are these midpoint marks, but marking around the entire curve also helps. So that gives us a good idea of where the pocket has to go. I can see this enough for it to work, so I'm good. Now grab your pocket and grab your double-sided Dritz wash away tape. What we're gonna do is tape along the raw edge of our pocket. I know, there's so much about this that seems so crazy, but it works and it's so cute in the end. So just go around the entire raw edge, putting the tape right against it, because we're gonna fold this down 1/4 of an inch. And this Dritz double-sided tape is 1/4 of an inch, so it's just perfect for this task. You don't have to use tape here, you could just use clips. I find the tape is a little bit easier. It's not super sticky, so I still do use clips as well as the tape, but it does help. Once I get to the end, I will trim it. Now remove the paper from your tape, and now take that raw edge and fold it down over the tape. So it should be folded down 1/4 of an inch. Go all the way around. If it's not sticking as much as you'd like, that's okay. Just add some clips as you go. You might notice some struggles where the seam is between the gusset and the zipper. Just fold that down as best you can. As you go around, remember we have a midpoint mark on the top and the bottom, and our seams are our midpoint marks on the side. We still want these midpoint marks, but when we fold this down, we kind of lose it. So you might find it helpful to put a pin right where that midpoint mark is, just so you don't forget. All right, once you have that seam taped and clipped down well, it's time to attach it. So what we actually do is just top stitch this down right on top like that. I know, it's crazy, it's crazy. So what is helpful here, if you can, is to match up your midpoint line on the top of your exterior panel with the midpoint pin we have on the top of our pocket, and then just pin those together. We're gonna do the same thing on the bottom. Find that midpoint mark on the bottom on your exterior panel. Make sure your panel's nice and flat. And then match up your midpoint pin. And then pin these units together. And now we'll do the same thing on the sides. So our seam between our zipper and our gusset is our midpoint mark. Find your midpoint mark on your exterior panel and just pin this down. Trick is here, you want to make sure you don't have a smaller seam allowance than 1/4 of an inch, because then we might not catch it. So let's do the same thing on the other side. Again, your midpoint mark is the seam between your zipper and your gusset, and then we have it marked on our fabric. And then just pin it down as best you can. I know that this gets kind of thick here, so just pin next to it if you have to. So that's all I pin. I pin the 4 midpoints down, and then at the machine, while I'm top stitching, I look at my dashed lines on my front panel to help keep my pocket in place to make sure it's rounded and where it should be. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch along this edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Like I said, keep an eye on where your marks are on your front panel, and just make sure that the edge of your pocket is coming right up to those marks, and then you should be in good shape. This can be a little tricky. I know at the very end, the last curve sometimes can get bunched, but just reevaluate while you're sewing and go slow. We can do it. Okay, I know that step is challenging and different, and the entire time you're like, this is not going to work, but the result is so cute. It's this really firm pocket that just sticks straight out. If that seems way too much for you, you can completely skip this front pocket step, just skip all of it, and just construct the bag without the front pocket. That would be perfectly fine. It would still be a beautiful lunch bag. Once you have this attached, go ahead and put this to the side for just a moment. Now grab your exterior top upper piece and your longer remaining zipper. If you're using zipper tape, again, I'm going to cut mine longer than this strip of fabric, just so I can trim it down to the right size. Don't forget to add your zipper pulls. I do suggest using 2 zipper pulls here. Now, before we attach the zipper, let me just let you know, the zipper is supposed to be attached to the bottom of this panel. So if you have a directional print like I do, don't attach the zipper to the top, we're attaching it to the bottom. So take your zipper right side down along the bottom of that top panel, and then just clip along this bottom edge. Now let's take this to the sewing machine and sew along this clipped edge. I'm going to sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So after we have the exterior attached to the zipper, you can trim down your zipper if you made a longer one like I did, bringing it to the same length as your exterior panel. Now lay your panel so that the zipper is wrong side up. Grab your lining panel and lay it so that it is right side down, and just match it up along that top edge and then pin it in place. Now we'll take this to the sewing machine and sew along this pinned edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have the lining and the exterior sewn on, we can press the lining and exterior away from the zipper. I like to press any sort of quilt cotton with my iron. The waterproof canvas is a little bit more tricky to press, so your lining and your exterior should now be wrong sides together. Go ahead and press that seam down as well. And what I like to do before I top stitch is just pull the lining and exterior wrong sides together and match up that raw edge and just clip along it to make sure that it's the same length. Okay, now we can take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch next to the zipper at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I top stitched down the fabric around my zipper. I also went ahead and just basted down these raw edges so that they're not separating and confusing me later in the pattern. This is just to keep it clean. So now grab your lower panel with the pocket, and we're going to attach the other end of the zipper in the same way. So let's take the bottom edge of the zipper and lay it right side down against the right side of our lower panel, and then just clip along that top edge. Okay, let's take this to the sewing machine and sew along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have the zipper attached to the exterior panel, grab the lining lower panel and lay that right side down against the back of that zipper, and then just clip along that same edge. All right, let's go back to the sewing machine and sew along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And just like we did with the other side, once we have the lining and the exterior sewn onto the zipper, let's just push them away from that zipper and press with our iron to get a nice crisp line. And then I'll do the same on the back. So once again, I'm going to pull the exterior and lining panels wrong sides together and line up and clip along this bottom edge just to hold everything in place before I top stitch. So now we can take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along this bottom edge by the zipper I'm also going to baste down this bottom edge over here just to make sure all the fabric stays in place. This bag is looking good. So we can go ahead and put this to the side. Let's prep our back panel, and then all we have to do is put it together. So grab the exterior and lining panels for your back panel and lay them wrong sides together, lining up all 4 edges. And then you can use some clips and clip these together so it doesn't shift around. Okay, mark a 4-inch opening on the bottom of your back panel. So now we're going to baste together these 2 panels at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, going around the entire edge. Just make sure you leave the opening between your marks open and unstitched. Alright, once you have this stitched in place, you can put this to the side. Now it's time to assemble the bag. So first, let's add the top panel. So grab your top panel, this is one with the handle, and then grab the paper pattern for that top panel. Line it up along the left side. And I like to use pins for this part. So I'm going to put a pin in the middle on the top, and then we're going to pin points A, B, and C. So these are on the corners and the midpoint. So make sure your paper pattern is lined up with that curved edge. And insert a pin where point A is, and then just push it down as you go around the side. Insert another pin where point B is. This should be where your D-ring connectors are. Insert your pin at point C, and then insert another pin on the midpoint on the bottom. Now take your paper pattern, flip it over, and let's do the same thing on the other side. You can see what I did was I held this up to a window and I marked on the back of my pattern where those A, B, and C marks were, just to make this easier. So once again, here's A, here's B, and here is C. All right, if you need to, you can adjust your pins. I don't really push them all the way in when I'm marking, but we want to hold these spots. You could also use a pen or a chalk marker here to mark these spots, but I do find that pins are easiest to manage. So the next thing we're going to do is mark those same spots, but this time on our front panel. So if you grab the upper piece pattern piece, you'll see it has the same markings, A, B, and C in the midpoint. So let's just line that up with the top left. Mark point A with a pin, point B, and point C. And then mark the midpoint as well. And then take your pattern piece and flip it over. So I'm going to hold this up and mark where my point A, B, and C are on the back, and then just lay it down, and it should match up perfectly. And then put your pins in those same spots. Okay, so now all you have to do is match up your pinned marks on the front panel with the top panel. So let's start in the middle. I'm going to start with the midpoint on the top of my front panel. And then I'm going to lay my top panel right side down and just match up where those pins are. You can remove one and just include them together like that. And then I'm just going to go around. So the first ones are my A's. And I'm not concerned about this piece right here. I'm just concerned about these 2 pinned marks lining up. So then we're going to go over to B and then pin these right sides together. This one I'm going to use a clip for because it's pretty thick. And then I'm going to go all the way around to C and then include that in the pin. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, starting with A, going over to B, and then adding C. Now once you have your A, B, C, and midpoint marks pinned, you can then just push the fabric right sides together and clip the space in between the pins. You shouldn't have a whole lot of puckering here, especially if you're using waterproof canvas. It should all fit together pretty well. I do remove the pins and replace them with clips as I have more clips added. Okay, so I have it all clipped and ready to go. You can see I do leave 2 pins in. These are the ones on the bottom, and these are my starting and stopping marks. So I'm gonna start sewing at my first pin, sew all the way around the bottom at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then stop at the other pin. Make sure you backstitch well at both of these marks. I find a stiletto and going very slow is gonna be your friend here. I sew with the lining side of the top panel up. So I sew just like this. Also, when I'm sewing and I go around the curves, I always make sure that this lining side of my top panel is facing straight up just like this. So when you go around the curves, don't try to push this whole thing down. You want it facing up and just keep rotating it up as you sew. This is gonna make it easier to sew around those tricky little curves. After you get done, you need to inspect it. I want to show you, see right here, we have a pucker. So I'm going to unstitch this and I'm going to restitch it because that's going to look bad on the end result. And this is just kind of how it goes with curves. We do a lot of seam ripping. So I'm going to reclip that. And then over on the beginning, I noticed that it's just a little too close to the edge, so I'm going to unpick this as well and restitch just this beginning corner just to make sure it's all the way to the edge. I don't want to ever have to worry about a hole coming up in my bag. All right, and then now what I do is I just patch sew. So when I just sew the spots that are causing trouble, I backstitch at the beginning and the end of those stitches, and I make sure I go over the previous stitches around it, and that will keep everything nice and tidy. So these corners are hard, so I'm just gonna start over previous stitches, backstitch, and just try to rotate this bag through. I use my stiletto to kind of pull it out from underneath. You have waterproof canvas, you can really tug at this with a stiletto without having to worry about it ripping. This is why we rotate the whole bag and not just the top panel when sewing. And if it's a little bit bigger than 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, that's okay. So now you can see that pucker is gone. I just have to close it up a little bit further over here, but other than that, that section has been fixed. Now we're gonna fix that bottom corner. And this time I'm gonna sew it from the outer panel instead of the top panel right side, instead of the top panel lining side up, just so I can see it a little bit better and pull it. And there we go. Now we have all of it cleaned up so we can take a look at the front. All right, once we have that top panel attached, you can see that we inspected it at the sewing machine to make sure we didn't have any creases or wonky seams going on. But we can turn this right side out and just push along that seam, and it all looks really, really good. This gives you a good idea of what your bag's gonna look like. This is such a cute lunchbox. All right, so turn this back lining side out. And now we're gonna attach the bottom in the same way. So let's mark all of our points on the bottom panel first. Once again, I'm using pins, but you can use a marker or a chalk pen, whatever you like. So I'm gonna mark the top and bottom midpoints, and then I'm going to mark points A, B, and C. I'm just gonna flip this over and do the same thing on the other side. All right, once you have all the parts marked on the bottom panel, go ahead and put that to the side. Now we need to do the same thing on the bottom of our front panel. We have to mark those same points. So this time you can take your lower piece template, and it has the ABC markings on the bottom of it. Just line it up with the edge and make your marks. Don't forget to mark the midpoint as well. Flip your template over and you can see I made those marks on the back of my piece of paper to help. Line it up with the edge and add your marks to the other side. And just like before, we're going to lay these right sides together. So the top midpoint mark on the right side of your bottom panel is going to go together with the right side midpoint mark of your front panel. And then just pin those together. And then we'll rotate around to our other marks. Once you have the pin marks connected, just go in between all the pins and add clips. You can also replace those pins with clips. I would keep the very last pins on the bottom by the raw edge in place though, so that you remember where to start and stop. Okay, once you have it all pinned, we're going to repeat the previous process. We're going to start at one pin, backstitch well, sew all the way around, end at the other pin and backstitch well. We're going to sew this together at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Again, after I get done sewing, I will check for any areas that are having a problem and I will fix those if necessary. Once you have the bottom attached, let's go ahead and just turn this right side out real quick and check for any puckers. And the bottom is looking good. I don't see any holes, any puckers, anything like that. Again, the trick with curves is just to be okay with your seam ripper. If you have to redo it, then you have to redo it. It's okay. All right, this lunch bag is looking very cute. Now we need to insert the insulation foam into a couple of these panels. You can see on the bottom here, we have it basted down. Go ahead and grab your seam ripper and just open up some of your basting stitches so that we have a hole between the lining and the exterior panels. Don't pull too hard on this. We don't want to unwrap everything. So now grab your bottom insulation piece. So for me, this has the Peltex and then the foam and then the insulation layer. The insulation layer is going to go against the wrong side of your lining and the Peltex is going to go against the wrong side of the exterior fabric. So just slide this into the bottom and it should fit in there nice and snug. Once you have it inserted, just go ahead and clip along this edge to shut it, and we will baste it closed when we go to the sewing machine. The next piece is this long rectangle, and we're going to actually slide that in between the exterior and the lining pieces of this front panel that goes behind the front pocket. I like to have the insulation piece facing the back of the lining. I kind of fold it so that I can kind of tube it in there. The nice thing is this is a pretty big hole. Just don't pull too hard because you don't want your fabric or any of your stitches to rip. So get it about halfway in and then take your hand on the opposite end, grab that unit and then just pull it towards the opposite end, and then it's just kind of mushing it around for a little bit until you get it exactly the way you want it. Just make sure it's all flat. So yeah, it just takes a little bit of handwork to get it all even, but once it's nice and flat, it should have a really, really good shape. There we go. And now I'm going to clip the raw edges of that middle piece shut, and then I'm going to baste these closed as well. So before I move on to the next step, I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and just baste along these 3 seams at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to hold these in place before we finish the bag. So now grab your back piece and we're going to line this up right sides together with one edge of our bag. So it's going to go from the bottom of that middle unit up over the zipper to the top of the unit, just like that. And you might want to just take a look at this before you sew it on. It should be right sides together so that when it opens, it'll cover the back. So now let's go sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So after you have that attached, you can go ahead and flip your bag so that it's lining side out. And then I would unzip the zipper as well. Just don't unzip it too much or else your zipper might come off the end, which is not good. So now take the remaining flap and lay it right sides together with the opposite raw straight edge, and then just clip along that edge. All right, now let's go sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now, before we close up all the edges, we're actually going to bind these vertical seams that we just made. So grab some of your binding of choice. You want to grab 2 strips of binding, each about 10 inches long. So the method I use to attach the binding is pretty much just wrapping it around that seam along the middle. So if you're using waterproof canvas, you can fold it in half to get a nice little crease, and then just wrap it around that edge and clip it in place. And I just kind of check on both sides to make sure it's covering the stitches. If you find that maybe you didn't sew the straightest and some of the seam is a little bit bigger, you can shave it down, trim it. We'll probably have to do that with the curved edges anyways. So there we go. And then I'll take this to the sewing machine and I'll just sew along the edge anywhere between an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, because I really want to make sure I catch the back of this as I'm sewing. So I'm going to try this method first, and then we're going to try a different method that's suggested in the pattern. So after you stitch it down, just check both sides to make sure you caught to the binding and you don't have any holes. That looks good. You can see I used a great color thread on this side. I have a lighter thread on this side so you can really see kind of my wonky stitches. So if I had used the same color in the bobbin as I did in my top thread, this would look pretty perfect. So then trim down any excess binding you have. So the method in the pattern is pretty much just sewing down one side and then sewing the other side down. So we can give that a shot. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm just going to hold my binding over the seam and just stitch along the edge like that, covering those other stitches. And then I'll fold over the binding and do the same on the opposite side. I'm a little worried about whether or not I'll be able to see everything, but we'll see. We'll give it a shot. So that method of attaching the binding actually was very, very simple. I do like that a lot, especially with these straight seams. That worked out really well. All right, once you have the back seams bound, grab your last insulation piece, and with the insulation side facing the back of the lining, insert this into that hole you left on the bottom of the back panel. Once you have that inserted, take the bottom and the bottom of the bottom panel and clip them together. So before I finish these seams, I am going to baste this hole closed, just because the fabric, it easily can get pushed out of the way. So I'm going to clip just along the opening on my back panel, and I'm just going to go baste that closed real quick. Now let's close up these last remaining holes in our bag. So you should just be able to pin these sides together without having to line up too many points. So with the binding on the vertical edges, fold those away from the zipper. So fold the binding so that it's facing towards the center of the back panel, just like that. You can go ahead and clip the top as well. Make sure your zipper is open at least halfway before you close this all up. Again, I'm going to fold that binding so that it's facing the center of the back panel. All right, now we're just going to sew along the clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, you are so close to being done. All we have to do is add the binding and then make the strap. So I'm gonna grab one of my long strips of binding. And because it's waterproof canvas, I really don't have to worry about raw edges or anything. I'm gonna start on the back panel, and I'm just going to wrap it around that seam, clipping in place as I go. If I notice, especially around the curves, if I notice that the seam is quite a bit thicker or bigger and I can't quite cover all of the stitches with my binding, then all I have to do is just trim it down a little bit. So maybe 1/8 of an inch, maybe less, maybe a little bit more. But I'm not cutting the stitches that are holding the curve in place. I'm just trimming down that seam allowance a little bit. If you're using this waterproof canvas, you'll notice it has absolutely no stretch to it, unlike the double fold bias binding, which has good stretch to it. Okay, so you can see I leave the end flap hanging off. I'm going to sew along the edge of my binding. I'm kind of sewing in the middle of the binding, to be honest. I don't want to sew too close to this edge because I might miss the back of the binding. So I mostly sew down the center of the binding just to keep it in place. Once I get to this end, I'll trim down the binding so that it overlaps the start of my binding by about 1 inch and just sew it down. I don't do anything fancy for the edges of the binding when I'm using the waterproof canvas. Okay, once you have one side done, we're just going to repeat that process for the bottom. I'm going to add the binding in the same manner. And just like before, I'm going to sew along my binding. I'm going to sew in the middle, which is about 1/4 of an inch away from the folded edge, all the way around, and then overlap my end about 1 inch over the beginning, and then we're done with the binding. Once you have the last binding attached, you can turn your bag right side out. And there is your lunch bag. The bag portion is complete. Now all we have to do is build a strap for it. Okay, so let's build the strap. Take your strap and lay it right side down. You can use an iron to mark the midpoint, or you can just use a pen or chalk pencil. But I'm gonna measure in 2 inches from the long edges. And just mark that midpoint along the entire strap. Once you have your midpoint marked, you can take those parallel edges and fold them wrong sides together up to meet that mark. Once you have both of these edges clipped, just fold those folded edges up, hiding that raw seam in between them, and then add each of the folds to the clips. All right, now I like to close up the ends of the strap before I top stitch it, so just unclip the last few clips. Open up your folds, fold the short edge wrong sides together in about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch, and then refold the long edges and then clip in place. That just hides the raw edges. Waterproof canvas raw edges are perfectly fine. Honestly, you don't even really need to do this, but especially if you're using quilt cotton for your strap, I would do this step. Now let's take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew along all 4 edges, the 2 long edges and the 2 short edges, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just top stitching this down. that you have your strap sewn, let's add the hardware. So first, let's add our slider. Take your slider and hold it right side down so you can see the slider has a back. So right side down. Take your strap with the wrong side up and slide it into the hole between the slider and the right bar, and then pull it right back up over that middle bar, and then fold your strap wrong sides together just like this. So now you should have the strap around the mid bar of your slider, just like so. You can have this come 1 inch to 1.5 inches out, whatever you're comfortable with. And now I'm gonna take this to a sewing machine and I'm just gonna sew a rectangle going over the end of my strap, up the top stitching as close as I can get to that slider, and then back down. You can also add rivets here if you'd like, or make a design with your top stitching, anything to really secure this slider in place. So if you look on the top here, it looks fine, but if you look on the bottom, you can see I am not a strong top stitcher. Normally, I would probably just add some rivets here to help hold this in place. So now grab your strap and lay it wrong side up so you have the folded edge facing you. Grab one of your swivel hooks, straighten out your strap nicely, and then with the swivel hook pointing down and the strap wrong side up, insert the strap into your swivel hook, just like so. Now take that edge of the strap and wrong sides facing one another of the strap, pull it up and into that top hole of your slider, pull it out a bit, and then push it into the other edge of the slider and give it a little tug. So now you should have your swivel hook on one end pointing away from the inside of your strap, your slider in the middle with the right side on the right side of your strap, and then this last edge over here. Grab your swivel hook, insert it pointing up with the right side of the strap up, and then pull about 1 inch to 1.5 inches around, straps wrong sides together. And then we can take this to the sewing machine and then once again just stitch on a rectangle to hold this in place. Again, you can add rivets here or make a design with top stitching if you'd like. And there is your strap all done and ready to be attached to your bag. All right, I'm gonna be honest, I am exhausted. I was actually going to film this over 2 days and I decided to just bust it out in one, but it's so worth it. Look at how fun this is. So this is a Halloween themed bag. I am so excited about the holidays. Holidays are a really big deal in my house, especially Halloween. This is some of my favorite fabric right here with the 3 little hitchhiking ghosts from the Haunted Mansion. Such a fun bag. Let's open it up. When you look at it like this, I mean, it's the lighting, it's a darker fabric, but you cannot see the binding on the seams. So if you haven't tried it before, I highly suggest you give it a try. If you've used double fold binding and you didn't like it, I have too. I've used double fold binding and I don't like it. But the waterproof canvas, it was much easier, quicker to make, easier to apply, so much room for error. That's probably one of my favorite things about bags is if I can make mistakes, but the bag still is structurally sound and still looks good, I like that pattern. So here is our strap. Let's go ahead and add it to our bag. Here we go. Look at me. Where am I going? I don't know. I'm going somewhere though, and I got some good stuff in here. I'm so tired. Okay. I hope you love making this bag. There are some challenging parts of this bag, but at the end of the day, I want to make another one. Like, even though I'm exhausted right now, I'm already thinking about what the next one's going to look like, what the next version's going to be. I just adore this bag. So again, this is the Dillan Lunch Bag by I Think So. Use it as a lunch bag, travel beauty bag, bag for new moms for breast pumps and nursing gear. Great bag also for cameras. Since it's so well padded, you can put kind of those bigger DSLR cameras in here. I will be taking these bags the next time I get to travel, whenever that might be. This is just a really fun make. You're going to be excited when you're done with it. If you finish this bag and you post it on social media, please make sure you tag me. I'm OklaRoots over on Instagram and Facebook. Also, you can use the hashtag OklaRootsTuts. I hope you're having a great day, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Get out there and make something. Bye.